Before the Xbox and PlayStation drama that we all know today, there were several other console wars that took place over the years. So let's go back to the very beginning. It all started in 1972, when Magnavox released the world's first commercially available home video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey. This console was relatively simple, but it revolutionized home entertainment and video games forever. The console didn't really face much competition. In fact, the only other notable competitors of this generation were Atari's Pong Home Edition, released in 1972, and the Coleco Telstar console, released in 1976. However, this was only the beginning of something much bigger. The second generation of home video game consoles began in 1976 with the release of the Fairchild Channel F, which contained the first microprocessors and ROM video game cartridges. However, this console would soon be overshadowed by the Atari 2600, released a year later in 1977. The Atari 2600 also included the same interchangeable ROM cartridges and microprocessors as the Fairchild Channel F, but made them more popular. Despite its major success in the industry, even the Atari 2600 had its competitors. In 1978, the Magnavox Odyssey 2 was released, and in 1979, Mattel released the most advanced console of its time, the Intellivision. While the Intellivision was more powerful, the Atari 2600 still sold more units overall. The third generation of video game consoles featured the Nintendo Entertainment System, released in North America in 1985, the Sega Master System, released in 1986, and the Atari 7800, which was also released in 1986. Nintendo's Entertainment System was the most powerful and highest selling of its generation. It sold in the tens of millions compared to the Master System and the Atari 7800, which only sold in the millions. The fourth generation of consoles began with the 1989 release of the TurboGrafx-16 console and the Sega Genesis. This generation continued into the early 90s, with the release of the Super Nintendo Entertainment System and the Neo Geo in 1991. This generation also featured numerous new handheld gaming devices, most notably the Nintendo Game Boy. Nintendo's Entertainment System dominated this generation in sales, with units sold in the tens of millions once again, but it can be argued that the Neo Geo was the most powerful console of the generation. The fifth generation of video game consoles, also known as the 3D era, began with the introduction of a brand new major competitor, who released their first console in North America in 1995. This console was the original PlayStation. The release of Sony's PlayStation was quickly followed by Sega's newest console, the Saturn, in 1995, and Nintendo's new Nintendo 64, released in 1996. The Saturn only sold units in the millions, while Nintendo 64 sold in the tens of millions. However, Sony and the PlayStation sold units in the hundreds of millions and featured the most powerful console of the generation. The sixth generation of video game consoles started with the Sega Dreamcast in 1999. PlayStation quickly responded with their newest console, the PS2. Meanwhile, Nintendo released their new GameCube console in 2001. However, the biggest shock of this generation was the newest competitor. Microsoft had been working on a new home video game system in response to Sony's wild success. When it was released in 2001, the Xbox was the most powerful console to date, featuring cleaner graphics and a better performance than all of its competition. However, this didn't stop Sony from breaking sales records. In fact, PlayStation 2 is still the most sold video game console of all time. The seventh generation of consoles started in 2005 with the release of Microsoft's Xbox 360. In 2006, Sony released the PlayStation 3, and Nintendo released the original Wii console. Many new innovations emerged during this period from each console of the generation. The Xbox 360 introduced HD graphics, the PS3 included built-in Blu-ray, and the Wii gave us a new type of gaming with motion sensor-based game controllers. Later down the road in 2010, both the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 would introduce motion capture features via PlayStation Move and Xbox Kinect, but these features didn't last very long. Sony and Microsoft's consoles were almost even in capability, but Sony ultimately took out the Xbox 360 and the Wii spec-wise. Despite this, the Nintendo Wii still outsold both the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 during this generation. The 8th generation began with the Wii U in 2012. In 2013, Sony released the PlayStation 4, and Microsoft released the Xbox One. Again, consoles featured new technologies including cloud gaming, and featured premium gaming subscriptions called PlayStation Plus and Xbox Game Pass. Both Sony and Microsoft also released additional console options with updated technology called PlayStation 4 Pro and Xbox One X, followed by two more cheaper editions called PlayStation 4 Slim and Xbox One S. During this period, new innovations such as portable gaming and virtual reality were becoming more and more popular, which prompted PlayStation to release the PlayStation VR. It's also worth mentioning that Nintendo released the Switch during this generation in 2017, but some people consider the Switch to also be a member of the 9th generation. Out of the original consoles of this generation, the PlayStation 4 outsold and outperformed the Wii U and the Xbox One. However, out of the more powerful variations that came later on, the Xbox One X outperformed the PS4 Pro and the PS4. The 9th generation and current generation kicked off in 2020 with the release of the Xbox Series X and S and the PlayStation 5. Like I mentioned earlier, the Nintendo Switch was also still hanging on during this generation as well, but was more or less a background competitor. The generation featured more storage capacity on all fronts and better resolution for all consoles as well. Nintendo even offered a new Switch version called the OLED to compete with the Xbox and PlayStation's video quality. Now, I'm sure this doesn't come as a surprise to many when I say that the PlayStation 5 outsold the Xbox Series X and S in yet another Sony sales victory. However, the Xbox Series X is technically the most powerful console of this generation. However, Sony has announced the PlayStation 5 Pro, which is set to have similar specs to the Xbox Series X, and may even be slightly better. So what do you guys think? Do you think consoles' victories should be determined by quality and performance, or their overall sales? Either way, it's safe to say that every console has its player base, and at the end of the day, we all just want to relax and have fun on our favorite games, so there's no point in arguing, because I believe it's all a matter of personal experience and personal opinion. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out.